Well, Brian Calley is the 63rd and current Lieutenant Governor for the state of Michigan. He's an accomplished young man, and he is actually still quite young for his career. He served, however, in the House of Representatives from 2007 to 2011. Established himself quickly as a leader in that regard, to the point where our governor decided when he ran for office that he wanted to choose quality, and he chose Brian Calley to serve as his lieutenant governor. Now, before that, he worked his way up through the system. He was a county commissioner in Ionia County, and those of you that don't know where Ionia County is, just do the Michigan thing with the hand. It's just northeast of Grand Rapids. And again, he did serve there as a commissioner for some period of time. Is Bob Wiggle still here? So some of us that work in the courthouse and the county government, if you could pass it on to the commissioners, that just because you're a commissioner doesn't mean that someday you will become lieutenant governor. But it does happen for some. I got to know the lieutenant governor a little bit private ways, but one of them was the prosecutor in Ionia County for many years. Ron Schaefer was a good friend of mine, and also was a good friend of Lieutenant Governor, came up through the ranks with him as well. And just to give you an example of the humility and the sincerity of this man that we have as our Lieutenant Governor, and his humbleness, is that Ron said that a few years after Brian Calley had become the Lieutenant Governor, Ron went to work one day in the Ionia County Prosecutor's office. He showed up a little bit late, actually, he said, but he walked in his office and he saw a guy sitting in his office waiting for him, and it was the Lieutenant Governor, Brian Calley. And they were friends. They had been friends for some time, but he was kind of surprised. He said, gosh, there must be something going on. The Lieutenant Governor must need something. So he said, Brian, great to see you. He said, what can I do for you? What's going on? What do you need? And Brian said, nothing. He said, you're just a friend, and I just stopped by to see you. And that's the type of man we have as a Lieutenant Governor. He's a sincere man. He's someone who really, truly does care about his friends and doesn't forget the things that are important. Brian Calley is nationally known as a leading figure for autism awareness and advocacy. He has also received recognition for sharing his experience as a father to a daughter of autism, and for leading autism insurance reform in Michigan. Excuse me, and that again is just another example of who Brian Calley is. But it's not just when it affects him personally. In Michigan, when drug deaths annually overtook automobile accidents as far as the leading cause of death in the state of Michigan, the governor looked for somebody who he knew would be intelligent, who would be a doer, and who would get the job done when it came to addressing this issue. And he chose Brian Calley. Brian Calley became the chair and the lead of the task force set up by the governor to assess and address this issue in regard to opioid abuse and the issues that we deal with, and we've heard about so much here today. The Detroit News, at the time Brian Calley received this position, quoted him as follows. Brian Calley indicated, prescription drug and opioid addiction has quadrupled the number of unintentional drug deaths in our state since 1999. And we need to come together to reverse this trend before more Michiganders are hurt. And those weren't just hollow words or political words, those were words from a man who truly meant that. It tells a lot about who he is and what he did on that task force. I was honored to serve with him on that task force, and I saw that firsthand, that that's what he believed during the task force, as well as no doubt before, and has continued after. Again, it was an honor to serve with him on that, and I'm sure that we'll hear a number of things here today, including some of the findings of that task force, as well as the efforts as we go forward. I'm proud to call Brian Calley a friend. I know we're all excited to have him here today, and I ask and encourage each and every one of you to give him a warm applause and welcome here today. Brian Calley,
I should point out, I see here water, Abso Pure, a Michigan company, so good choice. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be here and to talk about this issue. And it's a heavy issue, but I want to try and present it maybe in a different light than what you've seen before, and turn it into more of a hopeful opportunity. And to get back to the viewpoint of redeeming or saving people, as opposed to the old-fashioned way of looking at addiction, which is that essentially it's a law enforcement issue. And if locking a person up and isn't going to do it, I don't know what's going to do it. I mean, kind of that old-fashioned way of looking at it, instead of establishing a system that really looks at the value or the worth of the person, regardless of how many times they've relapsed, or regardless of how much they struggle with addiction or what that addiction has led to in their life. So I thought I'd start out with a quick story, which was when I was county commissioner in Ionia County. There was the big issue that was in 2002 when I first ran. The big issue during that time was, how are we going to afford to build a new jail to house all the people that need to be locked up, because we're overcrowded and we keep on having to let people out early before the sentence is up because it's so overcrowded. And then we had this judge who reached out and said to me that, and the other commissioners, that we should try this new thing. We see in Kalamazoo they're doing a sobriety court, and it's really seems to be working, and we would like to be the second court to try this or to implement this policy. And it sounded kind of touchy-feely to me. I mean, really, at that point, keep in mind, I kind of grew up in the, I kind of came of age during the time of tough on crime, right? I mean, lock everybody up for a long time, and that will solve a bunch of problems. And so that was my mindset, and it sounded kind of touchy-feely, but I try to say yes to judges every time I can. You know, being a county commissioner, you try and keep those relationships good. And so they went ahead and they implemented this drug court. And I can't say that I followed it very closely, except for that the jail overcrowding problem seemed to be alleviated. In fact, by the time I left that position, not only were we not letting people out because of overcrowding, we were renting out space to other counties who were overcrowded and needed to house their people somewhere. And so as I was leaving the county and I went to right before I went to state government, the judge invited me to a drug court graduation. He said, I would like you to come and just see kind of the end of the process. And so I said yes. Again, I try to always say yes to judges. And so I went to I went to this drug court graduation, and I sat through it, and it was really pretty touching. And I had an opportunity to talk to this young man afterwards, who had been in and out of jail for drunk driving several times. And I asked him, what was the difference? I mean, I knew from the graduation ceremony that they'd just gone through. I knew some of the story, but I didn't know why. I knew what happened, but I didn't know why. What was the difference? And so I just asked him directly, what was it? Why is it that before you went to jail and you got out and it was the same thing and it didn't make any difference? And he said, well, I met with the judge every Friday. And then, and after a while, I met with him every other. And I had this one time I had to go back to jail overnight because I messed up, but then we got right back on track. And then after a while, it was every 2 weeks, and then it was every month, and then here we are. I've been sober for over a year, and I've got a job, and my life is just back on track. Well, why does that make the difference? What made the difference in that case? Why is it that you weren't successful before? And I mean, is Judge Vogt just that scary? Like, you got to see him this Friday, and you don't want to mess up? And he said, no, it wasn't scary at all. It's just it was the first time in my life that somebody cared about whether I succeeded or failed. And I thought at that point it was a tragic and yet hopeful opportunity. I mean, now I understand it's not as simple as that, right? That was every single case that you come across has its own unique set of circumstances and issues that you have to deal with and obstacles you have to overcome. But how tragic that this person who was 20-something, I don't know how old, 20-something, and really had lived a whole life where he could succeed or he could fail, and it really didn't seem to make a difference to anybody. And I know that you had Corey Waller here earlier today, And something interesting Corey asked me is that I actually called him before I knew him at all, but I knew him by reputation. I called him because somebody I really cared about was struggling with addiction. And so well, what's the best? Do you got to do inpatient? Do you got to do outpatient? And he said, well, here's the main difference between whether a person is going to be successful, whether you're inpatient or outpatient or whatever type of treatment or therapy you have, is the person wants to get better. I mean, if a person wants to get better, then a lot of these options can be successful if you have the right support around a person. And so these different pieces started to come together over time to show that the way that we look at addiction and drug use kind of through a criminal justice lens. If it gets to the criminal justice system, we have to recognize that we've already had failure points before that. Right? There are other intervention opportunities that we've missed. And so how can we get better at preventing that interaction with law enforcement in the first place? And so I want to ask you, and I know that we've got a wide range of people here, including, I was very pleased to see how many people in law enforcement and courts that we have here today. But I want to ask you to take this issue and think of it more of a healthcare issue than as a law enforcement or criminal justice issue. Because addiction really is, it's the health of the brain. People want to put addiction in the classification of willpower, right, or character, but really it would be more appropriate to think about it as biology. And so if we can change our mindset to looking at addiction as a healthcare issue, doesn't mean people don't have to pay consequences for their actions, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. In dealing drugs, by the way, that's definitely a law enforcement issue. But being addicted is a healthcare issue. It requires a healthcare response. And so that's where, if we can make that lens change in how we look at this, then it will give us, I think it will make us more effective in actually solving the problems that lead to broken families and deaths and overdoses and thefts and worse crime. And so how do we get there? I've got a few asks of you today as you move forward, and I presume if you'd come to something like this, you're already kind of on board with the idea of working together to make a difference in the type of trends that we see happening. Where since I've been speaking here today, since I've been introduced, somebody has already died of an overdose. And so how can we all work together in order to make that difference? The first thing I want to ask of you is to not give up on people. And so if you were to look at and this is hard, right? This is really hard. And sometimes you might think it's hard for you, and it's easier maybe for a person who is really close, or it's a family member struggling through addiction. But you got to understand that chances are the people that have been hurt the most, or let down the most, or feel betrayed the most because of this addiction are probably the people that are closest to the person with the addiction. So it's sometimes you have this role where you can step in and be the one who's not giving up when everybody else did. When friends and family have given up. When friends and family have gotten to their wits' end. Or just feel like there's nothing more they can do, or they don't know what else to do, and so have given up. And so you being in whatever position you are, in whatever type of organization that you work in, maybe are stepping into a role that you might expect that somebody else would be playing. But because of everything that has happened, it's just not. I work a lot on disability issues and autism that Vic had mentioned before, mental health, developmental disabilities in particular. You know what I found is that it's really easy to get people on board with helping people with disabilities. Right? It makes sense. You really want to help, but when there's a person who's really let us down, when a person maybe has hurt us or a person has hurt somebody else, then it's harder to get on board with that. And yet it's still worth it. And you can look at it in a lot of different ways. So when I ask you to not give up on people, maybe it makes more sense to you to think of it in terms of, here's a person who has value and worth to their life. And at one point, this was a little baby with all the potential in the world, and bad things happened in that little baby's life as they grew up, and they ended up being addicted to a substance, and it resulted in some really bad outcomes. Or maybe that doesn't touch you as much as the financial argument for how we can save an extraordinary amount of resources if we actually deal with the root problem. And maybe it's the idea from a victim's perspective. You know, there's this false choice people like to put out there, like helping a person who may have even committed a felony to recover is somehow anti-victim. It's the most pro-victim thing you can do because you're preventing future victims from being created in the first place. And so no matter which perspective you're coming from, it really is worth it to not give up. And as long as a person is drawing breath, then there is hope and potential. And so let's just take the attitude that recovery is not a straight line. And there's always a chance. There's always hope. And let's just take advantage of every opportunity or intersection that we can to make that type of difference. Now, when it comes to the criminal justice system itself, we find that there are a lot of different points where interventions can take place. And maybe it's the type of situation where a person's going to end up in jail or prison. But can we start the mindset where we start preparing for release on the very first day that a person is in the system? That we look at the longer term needs of the person to really recover as something that needs to start right away. It's not a 1 month or 3 months before release we start thinking about how do we create a higher likelihood of success for a person. Thankfully, with the increase in awareness of these issues, we see a high amount of, or high degree of support from partners all over the system, including in our legislature, by the way, that appropriated resources, not just in this upcoming budget, which is where we asked for it. Normally we have a task force report like this. It has recommendations. Some of them have a price tag. Some of them cost money. And we like to, so we like to put it in the very next budget. And the legislature took those resources from the very next budget and actually moved them up into a supplemental budget so that we could start some of the centerpiece work, some of the foundation work right away. And that foundation work that is starting is really in that system that would allow for doctors to practice with all of the information. Now, we were careful in this task force not to insert a bunch of people who were not doctors in between a doctor and their patient. But what we did hear from doctors is that when they have a patient come in to see them, they don't have the benefit of knowing, which was a shock to me, by the way, they didn't have the benefit of knowing what is the prescription history of this person that I have right in front of me. And I hear sometimes, and I don't know if Dr. Waller had covered this or not, but I hear sometimes people talk about that a person is presenting with pain and they're really good at acting, so you can't tell the difference. But really a person who is addicted and has been without the substance they're addicted to for a long time may actually be experiencing pretty serious pain. And so presenting with pain is not hard, even though it's not from a back injury or something, but it's from the addiction itself and the changes in the way that the pain receptors are working. That's why I say these are healthcare issues that require healthcare responses. but to give the doctor the tool to understand what this person's prescription history is so that addiction can be identified earlier and intervention can take place earlier. And so we have this system, it's called MAPS, the Michigan Automated Prescription Service, and about 20 or 25% of doctors use it. It's a voluntary basis. And if 25% of them use it, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really help anything because you don't have a complete history on anybody. And so it's kind of a hit or miss system. Now, why don't more doctors use it? It's a horrible system. I mean, it's on an old platform. It's got a small bandwidth. It's not user-friendly. It does not connect into the electronic medical records that doctors use today. I mean, everything about this system is very difficult and cumbersome to use. The good news is we don't have to build it from scratch. Many other states have gone first. And so we are in the process of working with a couple of other states that have already put systems in place that we can simply license what they do and put it in place here in Michigan, get it off the ground much faster than we otherwise would, and also use a product that has already been out there in practice and used by doctors. So it's not saying when a prescription can be made, but instead it's saying that a doctor should have all the information at their fingertips when it comes to making a decision of what the right course of action is for that individual. We really look at this kind of a centerpiece of the rest of the recommendations to understand how and where prescriptions are being made, and then to have the doctors themselves knowing the issues well, but now having the information to put together with that knowledge in order to make different decisions and intervene potentially much earlier. Now, that's kind of in the center of the recommendations. Now there are the earlier recommendations, which is everything from ensuring that we have proper disposal of pills and making it easier to dispose of pills. When I learned about how many kids start their addiction out of mom and dad's medicine cabinet, it was really pretty shocking. And so I thought, and here I am thinking, boy, that's how irresponsible to leave something so dangerous in your medicine cabinet. So I got home that night, and I went through my medicine cabinet. And I found in there a very old prescription for Vicodin from when I had my wisdom teeth out, which was a very long time ago. And I took one, and it made me throw up. And I hate throwing up. I would rather have the pain. So I never took another one. And it sat there for years. Got kind of pushed behind, out of sight. Now, I have 3 kids. The oldest is 12. And we got other kids coming in and out, as they get older, and more friends coming over and all this kind of stuff. And yet, right here in my medicine cabinet was this. And so this is something that I'm worried about that, but at the same time, I'm hopeful because there's an easy fix to prevent a lot of addictions, which is to not make it so easy for a child to experiment with taking things. And so we have this role to play, and there are several. I mean, there is a proliferation now of places where you can drop things off, and we're not stopping where we're at right now. But the good news is that that part is growing. But we're looking at the other end of the spectrum as well. But what about with overdoses? And trying to make it that much easier for a person experiencing overdose to be saved. First, we were talking about law enforcement officers and first responders and firefighters having the antidote. But it turns out that it's so easy to use, and you can't, if you use it when you didn't need to, it doesn't hurt you. So why not even make it so easy you don't even have to have a prescription or anything? When a person is trying to quit, there is in recovery we know is not a straight line. Right? Recovery is almost never a straight line. If a person is trying to quit, that's when they're the most vulnerable to overdose. When you hear about somebody overdosing, oftentimes it's because they tried to quit and they were successful for a period of time. And when they had their relapse, they went back to the dose that they used to be able to handle, and they died. And so if a person is trying to quit, and for whatever stigma reasons maybe, and they just don't feel comfortable going through a doctor for it yet, and we want to have help and support, but when a person is trying to quit and they're trying to do it on their own, why not make it as easy as possible for the people right around them to be able to save them? And do away with the requirement to have a prescription for that. So as we look at this, and there were many, I'm just throwing out a couple of examples, decriminalization of calling for help. You know, I might have, if I'm a 22-year-old at college and I've got some drugs in my system and I've got a friend having an overdose, I don't want that person to be doing a calculation in their mind like, well, if I call 911, police are going to show up, and I've got some illegal substances in me, so do I really want to call for help for this person or not? I don't want those calculations in there, because remember, being addicted is not a law enforcement issue. Dealing drugs is a law enforcement issue, but being addicted, and is it worth that person's life? So there is a tremendous amount of progress that we can make in steps that are, none of them are silver bullets. We just take back a little more ground, a little more ground, a little more ground in all of these different ways. Making it easy for people, making it safe for people to get help is the first step. And that's why I wanted to be here with you today, to thank you for gathering together and taking this so seriously, and to looking at it as comprehensive and not just piling the whole thing onto our court system and our law enforcement system, but instead saying our whole community owns this problem. And we all have a responsibility, or all have a part to play in recovery, whether it's making sure that everybody knows that you don't leave addictive substances laying around where people can get at them that could really be hurt by them, to having doctors and patients really well aware of what the risks are. I mean, you would think, right, you could go in and you get this prescription, and if I was given a prescription, it must be safe for me to take this prescription. But you can take an opiate exactly as prescribed and become addicted still. And so do people understand that risk so that they can make the judgment for themselves whether or not they want to take on that risk? And just the information that can be provided in order to head off problems in the first place, and then having the doctor have the full picture so that there can be another intervention opportunity, and then after a person becomes addicted later on, if we didn't catch all these other intervention opportunities, that we don't give up, that we look at it like every single life still has value and hope and worth, and that's somebody's baby. And let's just all take the attitude like not too late. As long as a person's drawing breath, it's not too late. So I'm going to end it right there so that I have a few minutes for questions. I do have to leave right on the hour, though, because it's my wife's birthday. I promised I would be home tonight for that. And I like all of you, but I'm not going to be late for that. Any questions for me?
Brian?
Yeah, Vic?
What are you getting her?
Oh, what am I getting her? Well, you know, a couple years ago, we decided that we would start, instead of giving things, it would be experiences. So we're doing things together. Like for my birthday, she got me the entrance into the Lansing Marathon next month. So I'll be running that, and then she's got a couple of places, new restaurants in Grand Rapids opened up that she wanted to stop by. One for dinner, and then another for after dinner activities, and so we'll be doing that. All right, any questions?
What programs are they using inside the system to help inmates as they get out and transition back to society?
Yeah, great question. So what programs are being used inside prisons? This is an area where we still have a lot of work to do. We have a new, relatively new corrections director, and one of the things that we had asked for was to look at the entire reentry process, but to start the reentry process literally on the day they come into prison, and so that's all kind of both under review and subject to change, because while there have been some successes in that area, there hasn't been as much value or success as what I think we could get. I would share with you one thing that aside from the recovery efforts and then the support system after they leave prison, which is really important. The other thing that we're starting now is to try and connect people with useful skills, so that's something else to live for, and to have that drive to be better for. And so in Ionia, there's in one of the prisons there, we've got a trade school, and people are coming out of there with real credentials that are in high demand right now. And while it's too new for me to tell you that statistically somebody coming out with this has this success rate or reducing recidivism, I can tell you anecdotally it's going to be very successful. And so it's one of these things where intuitively it makes sense. Now here, I told you I actually did have one more ask too. I alluded to it and I didn't get to it directly, so I'm going to say it now. Please be a part of making it safe for people that are making appropriations decisions to help people that have let us down. Now this is, it's here in this room, and it makes sense, right, when I talk about helping a person that's reentering into society, but then when it gets into the appropriations process and it goes up against all the other priorities in state government, the idea of helping a prisoner is usually far down the list. And yet, I just want to look at it like not only you're helping that prisoner, but you're helping our communities, because the cost of recidivism is not a dollars and cents cost. Yes, there is a dollars and cents cost to it, but that is not the biggest cost. Every single time you have recidivism, that means that there's a new victim that has been created. There's a huge community cost. And so by making it safe for a person that is making an appropriations as a resource decision to say, yes, we need to do all of these other things, but let's be smart about criminal justice and ensure that we're doing everything that we can to prevent the reoccurrence of crime and the creation of new victims in the first place. And that is it's a mindset that's growing, but it's still, when it comes down to it, those appropriations decisions, when put up against a lot of other more popular constituencies, can be really can fall down the list very quickly. All right, one more. Yeah.
Is there any work being done on streamlining and integrating funding streams for the medical system in relation to substance abuse?
Yeah, and I'm try and mask my frustration a little bit on this one. So we have silos right now that are making the entire system much less effective. And it's not just for addiction, but I will say that the silos and the divisions are most extreme for any health care that happens above your neck. And so if we're talking about behavioral health care for a person with developmental disabilities or mental illness or substance use disorders or some combination of those things, that we have a payment system that reinforces a physical delivery system, which is very segregated out from healthcare and the rest of the body. And so whenever I talk to doctors that deal with the rest of healthcare, the neck down healthcare, and they complain about payment and reimbursement and the process and how it works, it's like you have no idea though what it's like when it comes to brain care. And so we do have a lot of work to do on that. There's a group that's working on it right now. It's not just substance use disorders, but when it comes to the at least the social safety net part of it, how can we better integrate the health care? Now it always falls into this thing where people have territories and funding streams and things they have authority over, and so people are like, am I going to lose control over this funding stream? And that gets in the way of how do we build a system that works best for the person, and then the rest of us that are a part of the infrastructure to handle the billing and the funding and all that sort of stuff, we need to adjust or build around the system that works best for the person. So what I've tried to do is to separate out the who does the money flow through question for now, and just deal with what's the best delivery model for the person who needs the care. And then the other part, I don't care whether or not the money goes through this organization or that organization or this organization, as long as the person is being helped the best that they possibly can. So the who gets the money part really stopped the whole discussion for a while. And I think at this point it's fairly successful in just leaving that question aside. We're not going to change anything about who gets the money, but we are going to change the effectiveness and how the person is treated. So I'll say stay tuned on it. I wish that we were further along in that discussion than we are at the moment, but we had a bit of a setback in the kind of the relations and all the different players on that. But I think we're back on track, and I'm hopeful that you know, maybe in your next summit I'll come back and tell you about how great this new system is that we're gonna roll out. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to be here.
Just a quick note, on behalf of the C.A.S.S Coalition, I would like to thank everyone for joining us here today. As it was stated so eloquently by Dr. Waller and our Lieutenant Governor, the opiate and alcohol and all addictions really is a community concern, and efforts to work together towards treatment is so important. And that end, the Community Coalition, C.A.S.S Coalition, will continue its efforts on education, prevention, and treatment, and we welcome new members and participation as we work on this project. So again, thank you for coming, for spending the day with us, and enjoy your weekend.